Hi everyone, this is Rion Paper. In today's video, I wanted to give you a little update on my commonplace book and on my garden journal. Let's actually start with the commonplace book. So I've done one other video on my commonplace book, and back then I showed you this Midori notebook. I had a postcard on front of it that I just stuck down, and then I put a clear cover on it. But I've taken that off now, as I actually decided that this notebook doesn't really work for how I was using it, especially because it has just these blank pages, and I used it with an underlay, but the underlay was actually really hard to see when it was fine when you use it on a page that is blank on both sides, but then when you've written on this side and you put the overlay here and you turn the page, then it was super hard to see, which made it really hard to write straight. And I was just not really enjoying writing in it. The paper is great though. I will absolutely use this paper for other purposes where I think I'll draw on this. It's actually really nice paper for drawing. If you don't work with like too much water or anything, it's fine. And then it doesn't matter that it doesn't have lines, it doesn't have a grid. But yeah, so I've decided to actually transfer what I had in here, which wasn't that much to begin with, but that's for later in the video. I've decided to put that in this notebook. This is, what's it called? I think this is from Sakai. I think it also has Tomoe River paper. But it's a grid notebook. It actually comes with a clear cover that fits perfectly, which is really nice. I just took it off to put this vinyl sticker that I had for at least 3 years, and I just stuck that to the front to make it a little bit cuter. It's a really nice one. But yeah, so I have started copying everything that I have in here, which isn't that much. I'm still working on it. But this one has a 5mm grid, which is a bit bigger than I normally like, but I've just given up looking for the perfect notebook because that's actually kind of a pointless search, you know? A 5mm grid is fine. I'll just try and write a little bit bigger than I normally would, which is a bit of a challenge, but it's also kind of fun, just writing in this very mindfully, because usually when I'm reading something, I will mark in the book or article or whatever that is a quote that I want to transfer in here. So that is sort of when I decide on what I want to write. So when I'm actually writing this, I'm more focused on the act of writing itself, just, you know, putting pen to paper. It's sort of it's almost kind of a meditation what I'm doing then. But yeah, I haven't really commonplaced a lot for this year. I've just haven't really found the time to read a lot. And that is how I like to collect my quotes and knowledge. So going forward, I want to try and be a bit more mindful about how I spend my time. I guess that goes for a lot of us, but it's sometimes just really hard when you are spending the whole day working on different stuff, and then you do have a couple hours maybe in the evening, but just to find the energy to read something that is not necessarily light reading, but that's actually pretty complex writing, which I absolutely love, but it's sometimes I just don't really have the energy for that. So yeah, that is something that I want to try and carve out a bit more time for, maybe in the mornings before I start doing other things, because then I'm still fresh and my brain still actually functions. So I could totally try and read a little bit in the mornings, maybe just a couple times a week, you know? It doesn't even have to be every day. I tend to be a bit all or nothing with things, but, you know, just a couple days a week might already make a very, very big difference. So for now, I'm still just copying over the quotes from this notebook. And then I'll actually continue reading this book, which is a very interesting book on the sort of history of Japanese literature. And it's from the very short introduction series, which is from Oxford, I believe. And it's actually really nice to just get an overview of, well, any topic they've done, basically. I remember back in university, we had to read one on Spanish literature and Latin American literature. I did a minors in, I believe is that what it's called? A minors? When you do a couple of courses from another bachelor's. I don't know. That's how it works here in the Netherlands. And I did my bachelor's in Italian and I did a minors in Spanish. And that's when we had to read one on Spanish and Latin American literature. And I found that very fun, just to have, before you actually start diving into the literature itself, have sort of a feeling about, what kind of genres are strongly connected to the history of that literature, what kind of movements have influenced writers and the reception of writing. I enjoy that a lot. So that is what I want to do with this. First, I decided that I want to read more Japanese literature, but then I was like, actually I want to read something about Japanese literature first to have sort of a different look on the literature when I'm actually reading it. So yeah, that was like 6 tangents to say that I haven't really been updating my commonplace book as much, but I am really enjoying writing in this notebook. It's the Sans and paper. I got a little bit of, it's not really bleed through. It's what is it called? Like pinpoint bleed through. You can sometimes see where I put the pen down on the paper because you get a tiny bit of bleed through on that side. I've written this with a fine nib, a Japanese fine nib, but the ink is actually pretty wet. So I think that may contribute to the tiny bit of bleed through, but I don't find it too much. It's not too distracting. And I don't mind the ghosting at all, especially when you've written on both sides. I don't really think it matters that much. So yeah, enjoying this so far, but I definitely need to add more to it. However, in my garden journal, I'm actually pretty up to date. And I'm really happy about that. I have shown on the channel how I use this little book, but I'm just going to go and show you again in case you have maybe not seen that video. And now there's a little bit more written down here, actually. So what I'm doing in the Calendex page, or like the yearly calendar, is I'm using this as sort of an index for the book. So I'm not using the 1st of January for a page that is dedicated to the 1st of January. It is just, look at it as sort of chapter 1.1. And what I've done for the first day of every month is write down what kind of tasks we need to do in the garden. For example, for January, I've written down like garden care in January. Then for February, I've written down like the garden care tasks for February, etc. And just so it's easy to find those pages. But then for the other entries, these are all batched on specific areas of our garden. So this is the front yard, where we don't have that many plants because the front yard is actually pretty small. And then this is one specific planted area in the back of the garden. And then this is like near the front of the garden. And that is how I'm adding stuff to it. It is pretty up to date for now, but there are still some areas in the garden that are completely untouched, where we still have to, remove the weeds and actually work on the soil for a bit, and then, decide what we're going to plant there. But for now, everything that has been planted has also been added to this little book. So, for example, what I really like about this is that as we are now getting closer to June, when June comes around, I can flip to the page for June, which is the 1st of June. And then I can see here that I've written down 3 tasks that I have to schedule for June. And this list will probably grow as we continue to plant more plants in the garden, obviously. But right now I know that I have to cut our privet. I have to work on the, what's it called in English? Is it a red berry? It's probably not. It's a berry shrub thing that we planted. And there's another shrub that we have to do a bit of pruning for. So that way I can very easily see, okay, we are starting a new month. I have to carve out an afternoon to do a little bit of this, and then we're done for the month. Except there will be watering depending on the weather. Maybe we can harvest some berries, but that's more, as we go along, as we spend time in the garden, I'll see like, oh, maybe I'll have to do this or that. But like the bigger tasks, the ones that are easy to forget and that are often quite specific, like when you have to do them, some shrubs or some trees cannot or should not be pruned during the winter, whereas others should not be pruned during the summer or when they are flowering, or, it really differs from plant to plant. So that is what I've written down here. And then, for example, this morning, my partner asks, oh, okay, the cherry blossom tree in our front yard is getting taller and greener, but we can also now see that it has some like trees that are dead, I think. Not trees, twigs, like very small branches. When do we prune those? So then I could just like flip to the page for the cherry blossom tree. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah. So pruning the tree is optional. You don't really have to do that. But if you want to, it's best to do that when it has finished blossoming. So for example, in June. And then you prune the branches that are, overlapping, that are crossing. That's not how you call that probably. Or that maybe are too low, or that just don't look well, that maybe have barely any leaves. And it's just really easy to find things in here because I've already sort of compiled what I could find online, because sometimes there will be 3 or 4 sources online that all say contradictory things. So I'll have to do a bit more of a deep dive and decide on, okay, we're just going to do it this way or that way. And that is how I'm going to write it down. So now this is sort of very specifically tuned or tailored to our garden, which is something that I really like. It's also becoming sort of a memory keeping thing, just an overview of what we have planted, and maybe some of these plants will not survive the next winter or the next, maybe dry season. And that is okay. We don't always know if what we've planted will survive in our garden, if it will thrive or not. But then it's still sort of a memory of, oh yeah, I remember back when we had this plant that just died a miserable death. But hopefully most of these will do just fine. So the first block of bullet points are just some facts about the plant, lighting, soil, what kind of nutrients does it need, or does it like or not like, some specific notes. One thing that I noted, for example, was for our katsura tree, which is a Japanese type of tree that is not really quite common in gardens, but it's a really, really pretty one. And in the beginning of spring, I was really worried because the leaves were already very red when it was just getting its new leaves. But apparently that is totally common for a katsura tree, because the leaves start out red, then they turn green before turning red again at the beginning of autumn. So just some little notes that are important to know. And then below that, the bullet points are more care instructions. So for example, if on the page for June, where we just were, that is here, if it says here prune the privet, that is a very, very short description. But then I can go back here and see, okay, so how do you actually prune the privet? What are the things that we have to take into consideration? So that is sort of the instruction I've written for myself, because I know that if I just read it online and I haven't done it yet, we planted it just last year, then I'm not going to remember. Maybe in 5 years, it'll just be, I've done this enough times that if I see prune the privet, I'm like, oh yeah, we did it this way and that worked just fine. But right now I just need all of the instructions because I just have no idea. I've never done it. So that is what I've been adding. I had to update my little drawing of one of the planted areas because we already changed a couple of things. I added some plants because it can sometimes be really hard when you have an empty area to decide how many plants you want to plant. And the instructions are sometimes very specific, but also sometimes very vague. And we're just like, okay, we'll just plant, I don't know, 3 of this type. And then they're actually in the soil and we're like, yeah, it's going to take like 5 years before these cover the entire area. Maybe we should just add a couple. But we also planted some ferns, and we thought that this area actually didn't get any sunlight, any direct sunlight, but apparently like this little strip does. And the fern was absolutely not happy about that. So we moved that, and now it's looking great again. It's no longer brown, it's actually green. So yeah, you learn by doing, I suppose. For one of the other areas, I decided to just draw it on this page instead of on a little flip out because I just needed to add 6 plants. So that was actually quite doable. Yeah, I think that's about it for the garden journal. There's lots of herbs that we've planted that are doing just fine. Some lavender, some sage. We have 2 fig trees. It's kind of funny because we have a dwarf fig that is called Little Miss Figgy, and I do love me a good pun, but it's called Little Miss Figgy, and it's a dwarf fig, so that means that it stays quite small. And we have like a more or less regular fig, I suppose. That's one of the fruit-bearing species that supposedly thrives quite well in the Netherlands because, you know, figs originally grew a bit, how do you say that? They do grow in the northern hemisphere, but not as northern as we live. So not all species are as resistant to cold winters, but this one should do pretty fine. But the normal fig is actually really, really tiny right now, whereas the dwarf fig is so much bigger. And I don't really know why, but it just grows much faster. And I suppose that it will, cap sooner. At some point it will just kind of stop growing. But right now it's actually like quite big. And it's looking really good. I'm actually really happy about that. I planted strawberries in a little crate. I wanted to get one of these fruit crates that is sort of just a recycled fruit crate, and I lined it with, I don't know how you call that, liner, I suppose, and then just filled it up with soil and planted strawberries in it, which are now, the entire crate is full of these tiny flowers. So I expect we'll be getting some strawberries soon. Some more plants. Should still print some images for some of these. So yeah, plenty of space left, but that is not a bad thing, as we'll definitely be adding more plants to the garden. Actually, last weekend we finished, well, it's not entirely finished yet. We still have to do add a little bit of stability to it, but my partner and I built our own pergola. Apparently that's what it's called. I remember talking about that in another video and having absolutely no idea what it's called, even though it's apparently the same word as in Dutch. But it's a pergola that we built from just, wood. And we saw so many, how do you say that? Like online, you can buy one that you can assemble yourself, but it's just all like pre-made. But we just couldn't find anything that specifically fit the area where we wanted to build it, especially because in that specific area, absolutely nothing is straight. We we designed that area to look a bit more natural and not really thinking about that we wanted to add something like a pergola later. So when we were looking at all of those things, we were like, yeah, that's just never going to fit. It's just going to look really weird. And then my partner said, we could just get wood and design one ourselves. And I was a bit hesitant at first because we've never done anything like that, but it was actually surprisingly doable. And it just took some really, really good planning. I think that was the most important part. But then in like 2.5 days, it was more or less finished. We also lost some time because we constantly had to shelter for the rain. But yeah, it's kind of done now and it's looking really nice. And we plan on planting some climbing plants against it so that it can completely get covered in plants. We have actually a grapevine that we have in a pot right now, but that we want to plant into the soil and that we want to grow over the pergola. And we want to get some other plants as well. So that's going to get really cool. We're also going to make sort of a wall of ivy because we have a very ugly like stone wall that is really old at the back of the garden. And it doesn't look very stable anymore. And it would probably be best, if we had unlimited funds, we would just get it taken down and rebuild something like that. But we don't really want to. So we're just going to leave it there. And we've made sort of a fence in front of it that we're just going to overgrow with ivy. And then you can't really see the wall at all anymore. And it'll just be fine. And if we ever want to take down the wall itself, then we probably could without replacing it, because then there's just the fence with ivy and we'll maybe lose like 10 centimeters of garden, but that's all right. Yeah, so that is sort of the garden journal update. In the beginning of the year, I really wasn't sure if I made the right choice getting this journal and adding to it, but now that the garden is more in need of attention and care, I find myself looking back at the journal way more often just to check certain things. If one of these shrubs we have, a blueberry, was kind of getting brown leaves and I was like, does it need more water? I don't think so. Does it need more light, less light? And then I just looked at the journal. It's like, okay, I noted down that this one can get brown leaves if the soil isn't if the pH of the soil is too high. So I just added some ground coffee to it, just like the residue from our coffee machine. I added that to the top layer of soil and now it's doing fine again. So it's just really useful to just be able to flip open the journal, look at the plant and be like, okay, what do you need? What do you need from me? Yeah, so that is the garden journal and the commonplace journal. I think that next week, is it next week? Yeah, next week I'll probably do a flip through of just my planners in May. And then it's probably time to do, like somewhere in June, do sort of a Q1 planner notebook recap with just everything that I've been using for the past 6 months and everything that, has completely been abandoned, everything that's maybe been added during the months, and look forward at, okay, how has my system changed and evolved over the first half of 2024? And what are my ideas for the second half? What will I keep on doing? And what will I maybe change or add or have to shelve for now? If you have any questions about the Commonplace book or the Garden Journal, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. If you have any ideas or inspiration for either of these books, I would love to hear it. I would love to hear how you work on your Commonplace books or garden journals if you have either of those. And for now, I want to wish you a very good day. Take care. Bye.